Hello and welcome to the HistoryNetwork.org podcast. If you'd like to become a patron of the podcast, just pop along to patreon.com/the History Network. Thanks to all our patrons who make this podcast possible. The HistoryNetwork.org podcast, Season 31, Episode 10, The American Airborne Landings during D-Day, June 6th, 1944. This episode was written by Christopher Waters. He is an armchair historian from New York City. He works full-time for the United States federal government and continues his education online part-time. He has a master's degree in criminal justice with a concentration in terrorism studies from John Jay College, a master's degree in military history with a concentration in American military history from American Military University, AMU, and is currently working on his master's in American history, also from AMU. He grew up listening to and learning history from his World War II veterans' grandfathers and his father, who let him watch all the classic history war movies on TV. While his degrees are American history focused, Chris likes to learn about a wide range of world history subjects through listening to history-based podcasts, especially while training for whatever his next marathon is. The Allied landings at Normandy on June 6, 1944 were the largest amphibious operation ever undertaken in military history. Across 5 separate beaches, over 150,000 men made up the landing forces from the United States, United Kingdom and Canada. To protect the men on the beaches, a massive bombardment of naval gunfire and aerial bombs struck German fortified defences, troop concentrations and artillery positions. However, even if the Allied troops took control of the beaches, they were at a vulnerable stage until the Allies could land tanks and artillery of their own. To prevent German commanders from rushing troops to swiftly counter-attack, Allied commanders planned to land almost 24,000 Allied airborne soldiers in 3 separate divisions behind German lines to seize key features such as motor causeways, crossroads, bridges and other terrain features, especially on the flanks of the beach landings. Although scattered by misdrops, equipment failures and lost leadership, Allied paratroops and glider infantry banded together in small groups and attacked the nearest objective using speed, surprise and aggression to overcome the odds facing them. The western part of the beach head, that part being the American sectors, was where the men of the 101st and 82nd Airborne Divisions landed. They were able to take and hold enough of their objectives, despite heavy casualties, to ensure the landing beaches were protected from German counter-attack. Without their sacrifice, the landings on the American beaches would have been in serious trouble of suffering defeat or, at the minimum, many more casualties from German reinforcements that would have been rushed to counter-attack the American troops on the beach. The British at Ringway in Manchester and the Americans at Fort Benning had carried out assessments of airborne troops. At the start of World War II, neither country possessed formations of Allied airborne troops. With Allied programmes in their infancy, the Battle of France had a direct impact on the programmes and the rush to complete them. The German army had trained for and developed tactics for the use of both glider and parachute troops, tactics they put to deadly use against the Allies. In one of the most spectacularly successful raids of the war, 75 German combat engineers landed by glider on the top of the Belgian fort of Eben-Emael, quickly knocking out its defences. The German troops drove the Belgian defenders inside and forced them to surrender. Taking of this fort allowed for the breakout of German panzer units to outflank the Allied defences in the Low Countries. German paratroops made major drops in Denmark, Norway and Holland during the opening months of the war, often used to secure airfields, bridges or other key targets, ahead of German land forces. However, it was the 1941 Battle of Crete where the German paratroops achieved perhaps the most famous victory, when they secured the heavily fortified island from under the Commonwealth forces' noses after hard fighting and only relying on air support for supply and reinforcement. The Allies, especially the British, were keen to learn from the German successes and mistakes. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill wanted his process done sooner than later, but an entire system needed to be created. The United States had time, distance, and resources available to begin the process. While the industrial might of the United States began to grind into action, producing the weapons of war, the peacetime expansion of the United States Armed Forces began. As the airborne units were strictly volunteer and the selection process difficult and demanding, the men who made up the first cadre of airborne units were the best of the best. They were motivated, mentally and physically tough, and blessed with forward-thinking commanders like Matthew Ridgway, Maxwell Taylor, and James Gavin. Since the battle for France, the British had been analysing German airborne tactics and equipment in an attempt to learn from the German experience. These lessons were fed back into the training process and shared with their American counterparts in an attempt to equip commanders with an understanding of the challenges they and their men might face. The first American unit to see airborne combat was the 82nd Airborne, commanded by Matthew Ridgway. They jumped into Sicily and Italy into separate operations, Husky and Avalanche. During the Sicily jump, the men of the 82nd's 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment were scattered by misdrops and strong winds and were not able to link up together for several days. However, it did have an effect on the German and Italian defences, as small groups of soldiers spread over a wide area were able to attack and create havoc. In Italy, plans were made for a mass drop but were cancelled as Italy surrendered and the Germans pulled back from many of their southern defences of Italy. However, the 82nd's 504th Regiment was needed as reinforcements for the Allied landings at Anzio and would miss out on the D-Day invasion. To make up the expected D-Day invasion force, the 82nd was reinforced with 2 more regiments and glider-borne units, as well as the 101st Airborne Division, who had recently completed its training in England. The Allied planners foresaw the use of the paratrooper and glider forces as the key to protecting the 6 infantry divisions landing on the beaches of Normandy. The Airborne Force was assigned missions securing or destroying key bridges which German reinforcements would have to use. They were also to take control of crossroads and other key terrain features to allow Allied troops access off the beachhead. However, there was a big disagreement amongst the Allied Supreme Command about the use of the Airborne Force. On one side, Air Chief Marshal Trafford Leigh-Mallory argued the Allies would suffer extreme casualties landing against the German defences, similar to the way the German paratroops suffered against Commonwealth defences on Crete. However, Supreme Allied Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower and Ground Commander for Operation Overlord, the invasion of Normandy, General Bernard Montgomery, believed the opposite. Eisenhower, in particular, had faith that the paratroops would not suffer excessive casualties, but more importantly, to the overall picture, he didn't concern himself with airborne casualties as long as they accomplished their mission of protecting the beachheads at their most vulnerable moment. As the Supreme Commander, Eisenhower got his way, but made it a point of visiting the 101st the night before D-Day, the invasion date, to show his support for the men. To correct the previous mistakes, misdrops and scattered airborne forces of the Sicily drops, the American and British airborne forces on D-Day took two different approaches. The American paratroops used special advanced units called pathfinders to land ahead of the main parachute force and set up a radio beacon at the correct drop zone. Even with these beacons, the American transport pilots, facing equipment failures, weather and anti-aircraft fire, still dropped their precarious cargo all over the Normandy countryside. The British decided that their main objectives, bridges on the eastern flank of the invasion area, would be targeted by specially trained glider troops. The advantage of a glider was that a group of troops could be loaded and flown to their target with little to no extra training. They could carry more equipment than the paratroops and land together as a small unit. However, if a glider crashed too hard or was fired at by enemy fire, it would result in many casualties. Luck was with the British on D-Day. The British gliders crash-landed on top of their targets and in a rapid fight secured several key bridges. The 82nd Airborne was assigned the area adjacent to the westernmost American area of Utah Beach. Many of the 505th Sticks, as squads of paratroops were known as, landed near each other, while there were some that were blown all over. There were enough troops to secure one of the primary objectives, the town of Saint-Mère-Église. It would become the first French village liberated in occupied Europe. However, the 82nd units attacking the village were comprised of mixed units and even members of the 101st, who were even more scattered than the 82nd. Using their trademark speed, adoption and hard fighting, the 505th secured the village and prepared to beat off German counterattacks that were not long in coming. Glider reinforcements of the 82nd landing during the daylight hours unfortunately suffered losses due to obstacles placed by the Germans in open fields known as Rommel's asparagus, which were designed to rip apart gliders. However, enough men and equipment, especially the artillery assigned to support the 505th, landed near enough to Saint-Mère-Église to assist in the defence of the village. The other two regiments of the 82nd and the 507th and 508th were scattered but nonetheless made for the bridges over the Douve River and areas around the Méderet River in small groups up to company size. While they were not able to destroy the bridges, the rest of the 82nd defended what positions they could take or make, and in doing so held off the German counterattacks for several days until they could be relieved. Again, glider-borne reinforcements, supplies, and especially artillery landed around the 507th and 508th positions and played a critical part in defeating the German counterattacks, despite casualties and landing short or long of their landing zones. The 101st Airborne, the Screaming Eagles, had the much tougher time during D-Day. Their mission was to secure the extreme western flank of the American beachhead from German troops that could counterattack from the neighbouring Cotentin Peninsula. To accomplish this mission, they needed to seize or destroy bridges over the Douve River, take out German artillery positions that could shell the beachhead, and seize other key terrain features that would prevent the Germans from counterattacking. However, due to heavy cloud cover and fog, German anti-aircraft fire, and equipment failures of the Pathfinder's beacons and the transport planes' receivers, the division with its artillery was scattered over a wide area, up to 20 miles away in some cases. However, as scattered groups, the 101st's 502nd took most of their objectives, including the coastal artillery battery that was removed before the invasion and the German barracks at Mézières and the villages of Forcaville and Beauzeville. The 501st helped secure the beach exits to Utah Beach, even though it was not their primary mission. Quick thinking made this possible. This included one of the causeways at Pouperville that the division commander, General Maxwell Taylor, witnessed. The 506th, the one assigned to the beach mission, dropped too far away and proceeded to take and secure several bridges over the Douve in small groups, usually organised by a local leader after collecting as many of the scattered men as possible. Other small unit actions, besides attacking German patrols and posts, involved the destruction of 2 artillery batteries near the German positions around Saint-Méry-du-Mont. One led by Lieutenant Dick Winters defeated a German defending force almost 4 times the size of his own 101st Unit, and an artillery battery of 4 heavy guns. The other, led by Colonel Robert Sink, attacked another German 4-gun battery with 2 companies of his battalion of the 506th. As the 101st fought these small battles, they slowly organised their scattered men and formed a defensive front and awaited relief from the American troops landing on the beaches. Even though the airborne troops of the 101st and 82nd Divisions had to wait several days for their positions to be taken over by troops coming off Utah Beach and suffered casualties in the process, the men were eventually pulled off the line and sent back to England for relief and refitting. On D-Day, even with their units scattered or lost, groups of American paratroopers and glider-borne troops banded together and attacked targets of opportunity and secured nearby objectives. Since they were scattered across Normandy, it created havoc for the German commanders to organise their forces to counter-attack the paratroops. By seizing key features like bridges over the Douve or knocking out German artillery, the American Airborne Force was able to save many lives of the men wading through the surf on the beaches. The victory they won can be attributed to their training, aggression, flexibility, and junior leadership, all factors that allowed for the airborne to take and hold the majority of their objectives on D-Day. These troops were certainly special, and their sacrifice should not be forgotten. Thanks for writing that script for us, Chris. If you'd like to write a script for us, then drop us a line with your idea to info@thehistorynetwork.org. Once again, if you'd like to become a patron of the podcast, please pop along to patreon.com/thehistorynetwork, and thanks to all our patrons who make this podcast possible. Thanks again for listening. You've been listening to the historynetwork.org podcast, written by Christopher Waters, read by Nick Barker.